Yeah, yeah, you know,
thing.
but yeah, as soon as I saw that she won and I saw the outrage, it's my base assumption that someone at the top is at least one person at the top is smarter than me and more forethoughtful and planning. And so if she was going to win and there was already controversy around her in previous games, someone's done their due diligence here to make sure that they can, suppress these flames as they start to pop up, to have something to kind of lean into. And so I'm like, you know what? Before I say anything to anybody, I'm just going to Google. I just want to Google. I want to see who she is, see what's going on, what's around her. And I stumbled across like DDS. I'm like, okay, what's this? And they obviously mention like chromosomes, genetics. However, these people are born with the sex organs of a woman, right? Like it's like, okay, well, this woman was born with these sex organs, and prior to genetic testing, we would not have been able to figure this out. Like how many women have competed at high level sports throughout the, millennia that were not able to run through these tests so that you could say, oh, well, actually this person's hormones are elevated and they have an unfair advantage in this capacity, so on and so forth, right? So upon seeing that, I was like, all right, well, this is something I'm not even going to have a conversation about with anyone, because everyone's really hot right now. People are either really, really defending her, or people are trashing her and trashing the organization, trashing the Olympics. But then you see a flood of people do one of two things: come out and apologize, like, hey, my bad, I shouldn't have been so hasty. Or they come out and they are definitely down a notch in that like vitriol, in that rage, but then they still are doubling down on the like, well, but still an XY chromosome, or still like genetics, or still, I'm like, okay, that's a conversation. That is a conversation, because there's definitely a rabbit hole we can travel down. But I think now is a place where people are willing to have more contextual, empathetic, and respectful conversations around the topic of just women's sports and how it's transforming with the changes.
Yeah. So I think I agree with you on the in the broad sense, and I think that these conversations don't do any justice or help the athlete at all. I hate whenever the athletes are the ones that are vilified or martyred for a political cause. I fucking hate that. I think it's so stupid. And you see it on both sides. You see it on both sides. So, like, for example, take a trans athlete, right? So this is not what is this chick's name?
I feel like her name's pronounced Iman, but I could also
Okay.
be
Yeah.
pronouncing it
So
incorrectly.
the Algerian boxer. She's from Algeria, right? I'm not making that up. I think she's
Or
from
Lookout
Algeria. We'll
province.
go with
Yeah.
that. North African country. Um, so whether we're talking about her or we're talking about a trans swimmer or a
Mm-hmm.
trans wrestler, whatever you want to bring up as the point of conversation, they are inevitably vilified from a select group of people and made to seem like it is their choice to be this like paragon of a cause, of a political cause. And then the other side, they are used as that pawn of the political cause. And they're propped up as almost this like, I don't know, this like pure figure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is it's not either of those. Like they're just a human, and they have made decisions regarding their sex, regarding their gender, and they want to compete in that given sport. And it is currently impossible for a trans athlete to compete against only trans athletes. That division does not exist currently. So if you are a trans woman, you are inevitably going to compete with advantages. If you are meant and forced to compete against biological women, if you are a trans man, you have no chance. Like legitimately, you have no real chance unless we're talking about like ultra marathon running or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, which is really the only sport where biological women have a genetic and physical advantage over biological men. It's ultra marathon running. And the longer the distance the running, the better women fare. It's really weird, actually, if you look at it. So, anyway, beyond that, I think that it does these athletes a tremendous disservice to use them for political purposes, right? Because otherwise, like, they're just normal fucking people, right? Like, I really doubt that this boxer was intending to make a political statement by competing in the Olympic Games, right? Whether her trainers or whether her country or whether, you know, the people who are pulling the political strings in her country or around her, whether they wanted to make a statement, I don't know. I don't really give a shit. But it wasn't her, right? It was not her. And to your point, this boxer in the Olympics, she was not trans, and that was something that came out very quickly after the fact and after all the outrage kind of dissipated, where the jump to assumption was that she was a trans woman and she was competing against biological women, and that has always been a lot more clear cut than people who have these DSD issues, which are they're essentially genetic mutations that put them outside of the traditional binary male female. I mean, just outside, right? They're not creating new sexes, so that's a very important thing to understand, right? If you have a DSD, if you have a chromosomal mutation, you are not outside of male female in terms of becoming a third or new sex or whatever, right? In the same way that someone with autism or someone with Down syndrome, does not become a different species of human just because they have a chromosomal mutation, right? It's the same way. So male, female are overwhelmingly the sexes, the biological sexes. And anything beyond that it's a mutation. It's abnormal. And what do we do with abnormal edge cases whenever it comes to athletic competition? There's no good answer to that. There's absolutely no good answer to that, which is why there's so much outrage, right? Because in one sense, you absolutely do have an athlete who has a genetic advantage over their competition. That's inarguable. And whether she's actually really good at boxing isn't for me to say, right? Like people were using that, like her record, as some kind of point to make, like, oh, she doesn't have an advantage. No, she's just not that great of a boxer. I'm sorry. She's not. So just because she's losing to biological women who have normal XX chromosomes, that does not mean she does not have a genetic advantage in terms of her strength and her punching power. It's just normal biology. It's normal physiology. You understand these things. So what do we do with that, right? Because at the same time, this is a genetic mutation that she probably didn't even know she had until she was an adult. If she even knew it then, right? Like we don't know when she found out that she had this genetic mutation. And, you know, there might be people listening to this that are like, oh, well, there's no proof of this genetic mutation. There's no proof that she has XY chromosome, whatever. Like, there's enough proof. I'm sorry. Like, there's enough proof that it stretches credulity to say that she is not at least along the spectrum of like DSD, right? So where do we draw these lines then? Where do we draw lines? How do we say this person is allowed to compete versus this person is not allowed to? This person, it has to find a different organization, or they have to compete against the other sex or whatever, right? And again, there's no right or wrong answer here. And I think that that's what is so difficult for a lot of people, is that to create boundaries, there are going to be edge cases that just aren't fair. And this is one of those instances where the right, the most equal solution to this for everyone involved is not fair to her.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, right? It's very unfortunate. It's the same situation as trans athletes that want to compete. The best solution for all involved is for them to not be allowed to compete if they have a biological advantage, if they have a genetic advantage. And that's not fair. It's not fair for them. And I hate that that's the only solution that we have right now, but it is absolutely the correct solution, the correct decision for the options that we have available to us at the moment, right? And women, biological women, should not be made to suffer and should not be the consequences of poor decision making or people's inability to understand trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
Some people's feelings are going to get hurt. It happens. Do you want 90%, 99% of women who have been competing and training their entire life for this moment to be robbed of that because you're trying to not upset? Actually, not even 1%, the 0.00001%, the one instance, the one edge case, because you're trying to be politically correct to not offend that person or their supporters. No, you have to make difficult decisions. But where I think the boundary has to be drawn is boundary has to be drawn where they've always been drawn, right? Testosterone levels.
Mm-hmm.
The testosterone threshold for women in competitive sports, especially whenever it comes to the Olympics, it's a number. If you exceed that number, you are not allowed to compete, because the assumption there is that to get to that level of testosterone in your blood, you had doped. You had to have doped. That's the only way you could achieve that supraphysiological level of testosterone, whatever it is defined to be by the IOC. That is the marker here. It doesn't matter if they have DSD, if they have a disorder, a genetic disorder, or if they're biological female. It does not fucking matter. The line has already been drawn. So if that testosterone level is higher because of their own biology, because of their own genetics, that they produce more testosterone, but they produce, quote unquote, a supraphysiological level of testosterone, they can't compete. And that's difficult, right? It's difficult, but those lines have been drawn based on what is not possible for biological females to produce. And anything above that is setting off red flags, right? And again, like, these are not arbitrarily chosen. They're not. So if you test positive for high levels of testosterone as a male, for example, you didn't accidentally get to those levels. There's enough buffer in there that you could not have naturally tested for those levels. And this has been argued enough and deliberated enough and agreed upon by experts enough that they built cushion in there to where they are not going to accidentally tag natural athletes.
I think that's the thing too.
If you are above that, then by definition, you have a genetic advantage over your competition. So that's where this boundary has to be drawn. And that's where the decision has to be made, is if she could have XX chromosomes. I don't really give a shit, right? If she has a genetic disorder or mutation that allows her with XX chromosomes to produce supraphysiological levels of testosterone, she shouldn't be allowed to compete. And that's difficult because it's not her fault. It's absolutely not her fucking fault. And I feel bad about even saying that. And it's not fair to her. But you have to draw the line somewhere. And it protects the 99.99999% of other athletes. And that's where you have to make these decisions.
Yeah, I think that, to your point of, one, athletes should not be the center focus. It should be about the organizations, the committee, the mass, and protecting the mass, right? Because that's all we can do as a country, as we can do as organizations, is do our best to take care of as many people as possible, right? Because it'd be impossible to make sure everyone has optimal results. Right. And so thinking about that and moving on from that, I'm sorry, I just distracted. It's okay. Thinking about that, moving on from that, you're talking about, what levels of testosterone, where they draw the line. Well, keep in mind that the Olympic Committee is not testing your average Joes who are eating McDonald's every single day, ruining their fucking sex hormone. They're testing the world's best athletes to set their baselines. So you could bet that your average Olympic woman might have higher testosterone than your average American woman walking around in the streets. Same thing to be said for Olympic man. So, like you said, if you are above even those probably upper levels, the odds of you getting there naturally or without something genetically propelling you into that space are very, like, almost nil, right? So taking that into consideration, like you said, the line has to be drawn somewhere. And it's tough. It's tough. Like I've been asked before by, multiple people, like, what would you do if, your son, your daughter? And I'm just like, you have that conversation with them. And I think it all roots back to, especially when it comes down to trans athletes or just female athletes with elevated levels of testosterone, more quote unquote masculine features, stronger, faster, so on and so forth. It's like, hey, like, do you want to hurt anybody? Do you want to hurt anybody? Do you want to, do you want to have an unfair advantage? Like, especially when it comes down to contact sports, but when you talk about things like sprinting and so on and so forth, hey, like, who do you want to win against? Who do you want to beat? And like being able to have those conversations empathetically and saying, hey, like, I understand that this sucks. And also we have to maneuver this a little differently. And for anyone out there saying that there is a right or wrong answer, like 100% right, 100% wrong answer, there's a most right answer, because I agree with you. Like, this is the most right answer. But there isn't an 100% right, because some people are going to be jaded because they're going to look at it through their own personal lens. And in my mind, the only 100% right way to do this would be to genetically test every single individual and have ranges. And then you compete in your sex hormone range classes, male or female. Because I think about it and I'm like, growing up, I'm like, I remember being, 5'11", almost 6 foot at 11 years old, at 12 years old. And I was not allowed to play in my age group in football. I had to play up because I weighed too much. I was way too big. And we could go, oh, that's not fair. But it's like, no, that's fair. Like, it sucks because there's a skill level that I have not attained. Like, I'm going to be playing against people who are much more skilled and have more experience than me. But the alternative is me hurting someone's kid. The alternative is me making someone else's kid quit playing because I break his arm or his face. And so when you look at it that way and you go, okay, sweet, like that's a pretty clear cut, like this is the right direction until we can figure out how to, level things out. Otherwise, you'd have your Hope Solos and the girl who played rugby and whatnot playing against your maybe meekest men out there, the men who never started growing facial hair, were super super feminine and slight in high school, and you could tell that they probably just weren't generating the same amount of testosterone as the nose tackle on the team. Should they have been on the field at the same time? Who knows? But I mean, we don't have this problem in men's sports, right? At least not as loud and big as it is in women's sports.
Well, we already draw boundaries. We already have boundaries for every sport, and the boundary is male female. We already do it, and inevitably that makes it difficult for the lowest level of man to compete against the best male athletes. So if you're someone who is weak and frail and you really really want to play, let's say, I was going to say football, but football doesn't have a woman's equivalent. So let's say basketball. Let's just say basketball.
Mm-hmm.
You're really short. You're 5'5", and you want to play varsity basketball. You don't have the best chance in the world unless you're exceedingly skilled, right? But if you were allowed to compete with women, well, all of a sudden 5'5" is like a pretty average height. So like you might be able to scoot by. And that's not to say that women are less skilled than men by default in basketball. I mean, kind of, right? But we draw boundaries. We have to. And we can't let edge cases on one dimension influence the way that we make decisions along the broader dimensions, right? So again, that's kind of what we're doing here. We're saying like, okay, well, we need to be consistent with the decisions that we're making. And if we have one very, very, very clearly definable metric that we look to say, this is allowed within the rules, and this is what you have to do to be able to compete against these athletes, right? And again, that is testing within a quote unquote normal range of testosterone. And it doesn't matter what level of sport you play at, whether it's high school, college, professional, Olympics, it doesn't matter. Everyone takes drug tests. Everyone does. And everyone tests for testosterone levels to make sure that we are not allowing anyone to have hormonal advantages over their peers and over their competition, right? Because we understand that anything outside of what that normal boundary is, anything beyond that, above it, gives you a competitive advantage. We fucking know this. And like, if you break this down into its simplest components and argument, it's so in your face. It doesn't make any sense why we continue to argue about these things, right? Because if a woman tested for the same levels of testosterone as a male, right, we would not let her compete with the other women. Just outside of any other context, right? If a woman rolled up, I was going to say Serena Williams, but I'm not even going to do that because like people accuse her of doping and shit like that, or accuse her of like having some DSD, which I don't believe, by the way. But let's just say you said Hope Solo a second ago. Let's just say Hope Solo. She rolls up and she tests at 1,000 free testosterone, right? She's not going to be allowed to compete. She's not. They're going to be like, actually, you're going to sit this one out, bro. You're going to sit this one out because you broke our rules. We have rules. You broke them, right? So what's not fair, though, is trying to look beyond the rules as they are already explicitly stated and making a decision that overrides the rules because you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings or you want to accommodate a very small minority of people and make them feel inclusive. And that is really ultimately like where a lot of this comes from, is it's like you don't want to create an atmosphere of exclusivity within your sport. And I can respect that. I do. I can respect it. But it's the fucking Olympics. It should be inclusive. Like, I'm sorry, it should be inclusive. These are the best people in the entire fucking world.
Exclusive or inclusive?
Oh, yeah, exclusive. Jesus. Exclusive. Yeah, my bad.
Yeah.
My bad. No, it should be exclusive. And you should not be allowed into the Olympics to compete if you are not the absolute best of the 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 best. And people get cut all the fucking time that are the best of the best of the best, but like not to the 7th degree, right?
Right.
That's okay. We are all totally fine with that. We've all made a collective decision that if you get cut from the Olympic team, you're still very good. We're still very proud of you. You're just not that good yet. You're not that good, right? And we can all go home and we can all sleep at night. But as soon as you introduce a little bit of politics into these decision making, it's like all of a sudden everyone freaks out and like everyone's rational decision making collapses. And it's like, I don't understand why we can't just default back to the same standards that we've always had and that we've always relied on to be able to say this person has a competitive advantage or this person is within the bounds of the rules as they are stated, and that would physiologically make sure that things are as equal as we can make them, right? Again, genetics, they're not equal. We understand that too. LeBron is not going to be the same as some fucking dude from, Thailand playing basketball, right? It's not the same. But we can only define the rules so far. And we understand that to hit like the high magnitude items is probably the most important thing, right? We're not doing like full genetic tests on these people to say, okay, Michael Phelps has a longer wingspan and is broader in his upper body, so he can no longer compete because we have to make this as equal as possible. That's not what we're talking about, right? Like this is not that. We understand people are genetically better at certain sports. They're built for it. Katie Ledecky, like, that's a fish. She's a fish. But her testosterone levels are within the bounds for the sport. And that's the most important part, right? In the future, if we get to the point where like we're adding layers and layers and layers of genetic testing and all of this stuff, and like that's defined and it's agreed upon ahead of time, and all the athletes understand that, and everyone is good with it, that's a completely different conversation. But what we're talking about is we're talking about changing the application of the rules for an individual or for a minority that other athletes have not agreed upon in advance.
Mhm.
And that's what is not fair. And that's where the difficulty here lies, is that everyone has to understand the rules that they're playing by. And if we don't all understand how those rules are being applied, then what's the point of any of
Right.
this?
Yeah, no, I think that that's an excellent point, is the rules. Because I even had a thought. I'm like, and I don't know, obviously, DSD, and thanks for correcting me on that. I'm like, DDS, DSD. I'm like, DDS sounds like a video game. But I thought about PCOS and how for some women, symptoms of PCOS, one of them, it can be a manifestation of higher testosterone
Yep.
levels, right? And you can see this very much take shape in their body shape, body hair,
Body hair.
strength,
Yeah.
strength, like a lot of the more just like masculine, like almost like when you see guys having the side effects of like taking test. They start bumping things up. You start seeing these changes, and you can witness these in women who have PCOS. And this is something naturally occurring, and honestly, at a far more alarming rate. So like more and more women are discovering that they do have this, to some degree. And so it's like, again, like, where do you start to draw the line? Like you said, there are rules, there are established thresholds and baselines. It's like, oh yeah, so you have PCOS, and you're fine. You're in the ranges, or you're not, and that's still another conversation. And I think that,
It's important
again,
to
like
say,
you said,
it's important to note though that like women with PCOS are still within the normal range.
yes, within ranges. I'm more
they're
so
not,
just saying, like,
they're not gonna test positive if they take a testosterone test. So that's very
correct.
important to also clarify. They have higher elevated levels of testosterone compared to if they would not have had PCOS.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm saying more so just in general, in
Yeah.
theory or in concept, the idea of PCOS or other things that could, even out of your control, change your levels to a way of, ruling you ineligible. And like you said, as much as it sucks, and as much as it, like, of course, and everyone's always, what if it was your kid? What if it was your sister? And I'm like, it would suck. And I would spend a lot of time consoling them and being there for them
Yeah.
and letting them vent. And also, I would understand. I would be like, this really fucking sucks. I will cry with you. You worked your whole life to be here, and you had it taken away from you for something that was out of your control. And that sucks. And it also happens to people every single day, and not just in sport. It happens every single day to people where shit just doesn't go their way. And changing it so it did might take more out of more mouths than changing it or leaving it the same. And I think that is just a very, very important thing, that the rules are set to be fair to the most amount of people. And if you end up on the outside, it sucks. You just have to remember that it's meant to be fair for everyone. As much as, I should say, it's meant to be fair for as many people as it can. And if it's not fair for you, you have to have faith that it's for a good, really good reason.
So the rules have to cover as many cases as possible, right? It has to do the best at making sure as many people have equal opportunity in that sport. Obviously, just like in real life, that's not always the case. And again, it's not fair. But the idea behind rules in sports or in life is that is some kind of like local optimum, right? And if you try to deviate from that, you're going to make everything worse and more inefficient for the entire group. So that's the idea of rules, is that, okay, we're collectively agreeing to these rules because we understand that if we try and change the rules to include someone that is currently not included, like, for example, what we're talking about, people with DSDs, then that would, by definition, bring down the efficiency of the rules for everyone else, right? So that's where it's challenging. And again, you just have to make difficult decisions sometimes. And like, if you are in charge of an organization, if you are running a company, if you're in a relationship, if you are the head of your household, it doesn't matter. You have to make trade-offs, right? Like, if you're a parent, you understand that like what you do for one child, the time you spend with one child is necessarily time taken away from you spending with the other child. You have to make difficult fucking decisions. It's not always the best, right? In hindsight, you might be like, well, I wish I'd have done that differently. Okay, cool. We don't have hindsight. We're doing the best that we can with the information that we have, right? So, like with the information that we have, testosterone levels are super physiological, potentially, probably XY chromosome. What else can we do in that situation, right? Like, what else can we do? If she does have a DSD, if she is in this, like, fraction of a percent of people who would be, I guess, technically or maybe non-technically classified as like intersex, that's very unfortunate. Like that is a group of people. It absolutely is a group of people. But that is an outlier case. And we can't change the rules every time an outlier case pops up. And that's just the reality of the world. But have you heard of the case of Caster Semenya? I wanted to bring that up really quick as well.
I don't think I have. Let me
So
actually.
this one was a big deal a while ago. But Caster Semenya was a South African middle distance runner, and she won 2 Olympic golds and 3 world championships. So that's very important. She wasn't just middle talent, right? Like she was really, really good, like crushing people. Okay, so after her victory at the 2009 World Championships, she was made to undergo sex testing. And then she was cleared to return to competition the following year. So later reports disclosed that Semenya has the intersex condition 5-alpha reductase 2 deficiency. Wow, I did not say that very well. 5-alpha reductase 2 deficiency. And she has natural testosterone levels in the typical male range. So she does not have male genitalia. She may or may not have XY chromosomes. I don't know. That it doesn't like say that explicitly here, but she has testosterone levels in the typical male range. So in 2019, the IAAF rules came into force for athletes like Semenya with certain DSDs, disorders of sex development, requiring medication to suppress testosterone levels in order to participate in women's events. Semenya refused to undergo the treatment, which is now mandatory. So I would say that is absolutely her decision whether she wants to suppress her hormone levels or not, right? And I don't necessarily have an ethical case for saying that requiring someone to compete is a choice between suppressing your hormone levels versus not. That to me seems like a really fucking shitty thing to present to an athlete, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that decision is at least a precedent which we can go off of for what we're talking about right now. They made a decision saying that people with certain DSDs have a high enough natural testosterone level to where the equal competing against women would require suppression of that testosterone into a quote unquote more normal range for that athlete, that female athlete. So like this is again, this is someone who was very good. Like she was winning gold medals, winning world championships. And they determined that she had an advantage over her peers due to her testosterone levels that was something that needed to be addressed to such a degree that like they recommended suppressing her natural hormone levels in order to do so, right? Again, I would not make that argument. That's not for me to do. But it is, I think, indicative of how important testosterone is to being successful at sports. Like, I mean, if you're going to look at one thing, one indicator for someone being really good at a sport like running, or let's say short distance running, or boxing, or high jump, it's probably fucking testosterone. Like, I don't have the correlation charts in front of me, but I would imagine it's pretty linear up and to the right. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're almost 1-to-1 correlations. And that is really all the data and information that I need to be able to say, okay, if we're going to judge anything, let's close our eyes. Let's not look at the athlete. Let's not look at anything other than testosterone levels, because that is the point of these tests in general. It's to keep it blind. There's no prejudice. We say, if this person tests in the range that we've already explicated, they can compete. If they test above that, they cannot compete. Those are the rules. Those are the rules. And if you break the rules, whether that is on purpose or whether that's just biology fucking you, like, I'm sorry, But if you break the rules, then you can't compete. Again, it's not fair. It's shitty. Like, I don't like that we are forcing people out of doing what they have a passion to do and what they're potentially really good at because of something that's outside of their control. We have to make decisions. There are trade-offs in life.
Trade-offs and rules. Now, I think this is a really interesting topic. And for those, excuse me, listening, we'll probably put some sort of disclaimer before this as well, that everything is still developing. Our knowledge base is continuing to expand. As much as we want to continue to rely on what we know, there are I'm sure, will be things that we don't know, and there will be developments in the future. However, I think that it is at its base level, understanding that our point of view, the idea of rules, the idea of protecting the integrity of sport, the integrity of the athletes competing in said sport, is and should be the most important thing. And however we do that is what we should do. And right now, these are the best tools that we have. So we have to use them. We can't forsake them and muddy the water because it doesn't give us good, stable ground to continue to build on. We can't iterate on this because it's already wobbly, it's already conditional, and that is not what rules have been, and that's not how they're constructed. They're meant to be built upon or torn down and then make new rules. But we're not doing that right now. We're kind of, well, in case sub B and asterisk here, and that is not going to set us up for success in the future as it pertains to organizations that govern a large group of people.
Agreed. And like, just one last comment: if they end up releasing test results that prove that that this Algerian boxer, God, I keep forgetting her name, they prove that she had testosterone levels within normal ranges as defined by the IOC. Everything that I'm saying here, as it pertains to her, is retracted.
I do feel like because she had to undergo testing, and they disqualified her for games prior to the Olympics. And so I don't know. And I know that's where a lot of the base came from. It's like, well, if she was disqualified previously, how did she qualify for the Olympics? And so I'm not educated on if there's been new developments since then.
So I think part of it is just an unwillingness to be open and transparent with test results, right? So like, if she has tested positive for having high levels of testosterone, or if she's done a genetic screening, sex testing, and it's been determined that she has an XY chromosome, or XY chromosomes, then that's the end of the conversation. That's the end of the conversation, right? Because if she has XY chromosomes, then that is a biological male, no matter whether that person presents as a female. Again, like, we cannot work around the edge cases in every instance, right? And if she has higher than allowed testosterone levels, then we cannot make exceptions, even if she did have XX chromosomes, right? Like, it doesn't matter. So all of this is contingent, obviously, on the assumptions that we're making with her having higher superphysiological levels of testosterone and or XY chromosomes, which, if they release those tests and we are, I hate to say proven wrong, but like, everything that we say right now is negated, and everything that we're talking about as it pertains to her is no longer valid, that's totally fine. I'll eat all of those words as it pertains to her. But the broader conversation is still pertinent, right? What we're talking about in terms of there being rules, in terms of there being standards, in terms of there being boundaries for competition that need to be upheld and respected for all athletes, that holds. And that's what the whole theme of this conversation and the takeaway should be.
Yeah, no, 100%. Definitely, just thematically, this is a conversation that should continue to trend towards being fair for most people. But there definitely is, just a sign off here, some information that she passed the sex test, but there's some context around that. So maybe we'll do some research on that, and that's just for a personal thing for you guys listening as well. But again, larger picture, fairness, rules, and really just doing our best to protect the integrity of both the sport, the organizations, and these players. So thank you for tuning in. Let us know what you think. This is obviously one of those like heavier hitting and more contextual and slightly maybe even emotional conversations, but we'd still love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Yeah, and we will see you next time.